So I have with me Dr. Asim Padela, Dr. Shahzeb, Imran Hussain, and Dr. Athar Mansoor. I miss a lawyer here. It should have actually been helpful, but still, alhamdulillah, we have two people, one from design and the other from who's from the area of public policy management. Now, I would like to begin this conversation by sort of beginning from where Dr. Jasir Auda's talk ended, and which was systems-based thinking and systemic approach. So I would like each of you to please talk a bit about systemic approach to law, public policy, and design generally first, and then in the second go, we can talk about AI. I would like to begin with Dr. Athar.
All right. Thank you very much, Ji. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Am I audible? Okay, good. Thank you. Actually, I would like to first congratulate the organizers of this wonderful conference on Islamic ethics and AI. And I'm personally very thankful to Dr. Junaid Qadir for giving me this opportunity to come here and talk about my perspectives on public policy. So just to give you an idea that I am a late academic starter. So I have served as a public administrator for around 2 decades before switching careers and joining academia as a public policy academician. So I have firsthand experience of how policies are formulated, how they are implemented, and how they are evaluated, which are 3 major components of any policy cycle, starting from agenda setting and ending up till policy evaluation. And then stepping into the world of academia, I realized that understanding policy from theoretical perspectives, from generating literature, scholarship is also important. Although policy is a science, public policy is an art. Public policy is a profession which overarchingly focuses on solving complex issues which publics face, and especially in the wake of modern technological advancements and technologies, just as AI has taken the world by storm in the recent years. So generally talking about systemic thinking and design, you know, how different societies should design their public policies, I would argue, and I would like you to think deep into the concept of how societies have grown complex over last, I would say not centuries, but last decades. So since this ICT revolution, we see that people interacting more data being generated, more data being analyzed, more data being interpreted, and then people interacting in an environment where they do not need to come face to face against each other to talk, to intermingle, to exchange views. So it's becoming more and more complex. And as the complexity grows, there is an urgent and dire need to understand how systemic thinking should be used and utilized for generating an environment which is discursive, which is pluralistic, which gives everyone an opportunity to talk about himself or herself and share his or her ideas and views. And that is why it becomes more important to devise that art and to devise that understanding of how systemic thinking should be used for policy process. Secondly, I think the more important part is that societies as they have evolved, people have become more and more aware of their rights, their obligations, their duties, their responsibilities, and how they can become useful part of societies. And this awareness has also led to a kind of a movement where people, those at powerful positions, those at position of authority, they do not now consider policymaking as their monopoly or as their sole responsibility. And they now would like to take people on board for formulating policies and then implementing and then evaluating. So it's that awareness which has led the previously dominant segments, which were at the upper echelons or within the political framework, which were at the helm of affairs, who used to dominate policies and who used to make policies in top-down approach. So in systemic thinking of policy, I think it's more of a bottom-up approach where different components play their own important role, where they realize that they have their own say within different domains, whether it's like modern sophisticated technologies like AI, or whether it is conventional, understanding of environmental politics or health politics or educational politics. And they start to, they are put together as those pieces in that jigsaw puzzle where they have to interact and exchange views in a very healthy environment so that policies can make impact. Lastly, I would say, and I would again like you to think through this concept of, why are policies made, right? So public policy is a science. It's as I've told you, it's an art where the overarching goal is to improve lives of people. And the way we are growing complex, it becomes very difficult for only few segments or few people who consider themselves as experts to make policies and then implement policies. So it's to improve lives, and for improving lives, it needs to be a systemic thinking where people should interact in a fairly, transparent manner, in a manner where they should not be apprehensive of others, in a manner where there should be enough social capital within the society so that policies are robust, resilient, and they can really change lives of people for betterment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Athre. I have one follow-up question, although I had actually made myself promise that I wouldn't do that, but just one follow-up question, because you are coming from that background. When you say we need to have representatives from, so now there's this democratic understanding where everyone should have their say and opinion on such matters. And then we have the Islamic understanding of a shura, competent, wise people who know the area, the subject, the field, who can invest time and energy into it. Now, how do you see that? What would be the representative sample for such policy making as you see it from your position?
I think very interesting and challenging question for a person like me who is kind of himself not very clear that how you select those experts according to, if we talk about Islamic standards, they're the people who are, have that status of maybe piety, have that knowledge, requisite knowledge to understand that complex issues, have an understanding, and as you have said, that they are willing to invest their time, their resources into something which is of really public importance. I think as far as representative sample is concerned, there is no hard and fast. You cannot, clearly put things in black and white. It needs to be, some kind of judgment call of those who have taken this task upon themselves of leading in a specific policy domain like AI, and then as experts in their own field, they can act. I don't know. It's talking in terms of statistical terms. It may be random sampling first, and then going into getting deeper insights through deep interviews, through deep interactions, and understanding whether they really possess that expertise which can be of benefit in a particular domain. But to give you a very straight answer, in the world of public policy, it becomes very, very difficult. It becomes extremely difficult. I agree. If we relate it with Islamic concept of shura, if we relate it with Islamic concept of democracy, where people have to have certain moral, ethical standards with them, then they must lead people from the front in that domain. We need to. This is the challenge. This is the challenge for today. How we merge them with modern complex issues which we can face. For example, in my university in Hong Kong, I had an interaction with a person who was saying that we are in the final stages of that experiment where males would be bearing children. And I was like shocked and stunned for about 20 odd seconds that how is it going to be adopted in a society like yours also? So, but I couldn't ask the question. I couldn't muster that courage to counter question him that really, are you going to make lives tough for us? So you see, this is these are the concepts, these are the things, these are debates which are going around.
And then there's
but
the
it's very
silent
difficult.
pressure that didn't allow you to ask the question.
Yes, so
Yeah,
kind
this
of, you see,
passive pressure.
so we need to, I think, for people like us who are followers of some dogma, who are followers of some religion, who are followers of some kind of philosophy, religious philosophy, it becomes difficult, it becomes challenging to convince people who are moving around and have developed their own expertise in different domains. But at the same time, I think slowly and gradually moving ahead and letting and gathering that steam, that momentum to showcase that we are also experts, we are all trying to understand. And Islam is not a religion for a small period of time, it's a religion for the entire time till the world is destroyed.
Right,
Thank you so much.
you. I would like Mr. Imran to carry further this discussion, while also adding as to how, for instance, if you're talking about public policy making in the context of, let's say, Pakistan or US, how what is happening in Hong Kong wouldn't affect our policy decisions or design approach to things.
Okay. First of all, I'm not I don't think I'm qualified to talk about legal matters or public policy. I'll just talk about, since my area of expertise is design of technology systems and the impact it has on people. I'll just talk from a personal and my own practitioner kind of viewpoint, and also as a citizen of the world. Why we're talking about AI and ethics, I think I missed the initial talks, but now today, in the last few years, it's become so apparent that the power of AI is so enormous. And we have seen in the past few years, and every month, every week, in fact, a new scandal emerges which demonstrates how, if AI is misused, the harmful impact it can have on society. So AI is extremely powerful, okay? Technology and AI is causing unprecedented change and disruption in the world and in society, And that is why it's a pressing issue of our day. And it will increasingly become more and more pressing and a dire need if something is not done to address it, Because what we're seeing in the world now is we have these companies who are known as big tech, okay? And they have, through the use of AI and algorithms and data, the accumulation of data, and then the manipulation of data, they are acquiring, day by day, minute by minute, more and more power, right? And I think that is what needs to be understood, that AI is power, right? And I think one of my friends, Dr. Asim, I think in his talk, he referred to this, it's important to understand the power dynamics, So if we talk about AI and how we can use systems thinking, it's important to look at it from a very holistic point of view, We have to, let's say, start with the people who design the algorithms, okay? Who design technology applications. We have to look at the companies who employ those algorithms. We have to look at how that data is used, acquired and used and deployed, because data doesn't just simply reside in a database. We all know that data is brokered as well, and it's used and employed across this ecosystem of data collection and data mining, not just in one company, but across a whole industry. So what is happening in the world? I can't talk about Hong Kong, sorry. But I mean, I just follow the news like every other person. I try to keep up with what's happening in China, in the US, because that's where the major technological disruptions and innovations are happening. So technology is a double-edged sword, right? Technology is neither good or bad. The use of technology makes it good or bad, okay? And it's people, and then by extension companies, and by extension institutions, and by extension governments who make this technology good or bad. What is happening with AI in China, for example? Well, there's facial recognition technology that the China government is using, and without going too deeply into the merits and demerits, mainly China is using facial recognition technology, which is AI, for maintaining public order, right? That's basically the thrust, surveillance, but to maintain public order. That is the thrust of China's employment of AI, right? What is, in contrast, what is happening in the US? How are they using technology? Well, in the US, it's mainly private companies who are using AI, okay, and through AI data to acquire and generate more revenue and more money and capital, right? So I think these two examples, without going into too much details, kind of demonstrate that it's basically how AI and data is regulated or not regulated that will lead to different outcomes in society. You know? So I think from a systems thinking point of view or a systems design point of view, I think we need to adopt a very holistic approach, starting all the way, from people who design algorithms to how companies are managed and regulated. Because right now, big tech companies are not regulated, so they need to be regulated. Okay, but I think even beyond that, then we need to think about some kind of philosophy, which, and being a Muslim, I would look towards the Islamic philosophy, and we've talked about that. We've heard about that today a lot. What ethics and what values does that provide us so we can guide the use of this technology and its regulation in society? So right now, if I talk about it from a practitioner's point of view, when we design systems, when we design services, technology-based services, today we lack the tools and the frameworks that will help us understand the impact of our design decisions, right? So that's just another example of areas where we need to maybe focus, right? But I think it has to start with a philosophy. That philosophy should generate guidance and policy recommend that can be used for policy building, for regulating companies, maybe for helping people become more aware of their design decisions in AI. So these are just some thoughts, and there's a lot of detail that we can get into, but I don't want to take everyone's time here.
So one quick question, and that is, because you're running your own business, so to say, do you think it allows you to sort of streamline it better than had you been working for a big corporate? And if yes, then in what ways does it allow you, gives you more sort of freedom and moral imagination to work?
Yeah. Running my own kind of, I'm a consultant, so running my own company gives me the freedom and the liberty to, I have more freedom, right? I mean, if a client comes and they're designing a system, which I think is morally, ethically not in, it doesn't kind of match my values, then I have the freedom to reject that. But it really, there's limited freedom if you're designing a system because the brief is given by a client. Okay, so you take the client or you don't take the client. Okay.
So you cannot sort of improvise on it.
No, not really. No, I mean, it's limited. You can, but it's limited, right?
Or you cannot actually nudge.
You can, but see, the problem is that when people design technology, then a lot of the time the intention is really good, right? So for example, a lot of these companies, big tech companies that are big today, whom we call big tech, a lot of them started with good intention. But the problem is that these companies, they exist within an ecosystem, okay? And that ecosystem is currently dominated by capitalism, okay? So even, I'm just giving you a small example. Someone invented the like button on Facebook, okay? Now, the intention of that designer was to improve the user experience, but later on, this like button became part of an addictive culture, okay? So what actually happens is that people start with good intentions, but they're part of a system. They're part of a machinery, okay? And the system, which could be the company or beyond that, co-ops or appropriates that technology for probably something that is ethically or morally not good, and maybe it's harmful for society. So that's where a larger framework, a philosophy, a regulation, these things are really imperative, you know. And we've seen that we can't trust companies, you know. This whole thing about free market economy and being good for society, everything in the past few years has opened up. You know, we all hear about stories about Google and Facebook and Amazon and their shenanigans, I'd say, right? So yeah.
All right. So Dr. Junaid, I think, has something to add.
Yeah.
Coming from the background of design, and within design thinking, there is this concept of reframing the situation. So I just want to ask that when we talk of design, it's not just the corporation or the company or the application developer, it's also the user of the application. So can we somehow reframe the situation so that we are more in control of our situation? We are not victims of technological addiction. I speak, I'm a concerned father. My child is studying in a school in which iPad is mandatory, and so I want to, tomorrow we will talk about this. Growing up in the world of today, where there are so many potent fitness, trial, right? So हमने 5 की analogy इस्तेमाल की, जो भी एक trial है, you can be going through it. So in the same manner, when mature adults like us are finding it hard to do the things that we want to do, and we get distracted all of the time. So for young people, can we make use of ideas from design thinking and reframing the situation so that we train them in this? Do you think that's a viable idea?
So are you talking about the people who use technology or people who design technology?
For instance, like if I use the internet, sometimes I would intentionally close the internet, or I would install extensions that would block certain websites. So I have to do that so that I can focus. So do you think this is, I mean, I find it risky, but do you think we need to go to this extent?
Well, we all have our parenting techniques and tactics. If we talk about how to kind of safeguard ourselves and people that are close to us from the harmful effects of technology, then obviously, yes, teaching them, making them more aware. I think the best tool is always education and awareness, especially with children. There's an extent to which probably they can be controlled. And I think
But he's actually asking if there's something that we can do while designing it. If we have this in our minds, is something that could be a part of the design philosophy or the.
Oh, right. Yeah. So yeah. So as a designer, definitely, you know. So first of all, what is design? You know, basically any object or any system or software that exists has been designed. Okay, but good design should employ a human-centered approach. Okay, and in the past 20 years, there's been a lot of work on this in different schools and universities, and now it's become kind of mainstream thinking even within private companies, that you design things which are human-centered, which are useful and usable and user-friendly, but it should also take into account whether they're viable and whether they're feasible. What is actually lacking is the moral and ethical and societal impacts of technology. I don't think designers and technology companies think, they don't pay attention to that as much as they should. Okay, why? There are various reasons for that. Some of it has to do with commercial interests, the constraints of time and budget when you're working on a project. It doesn't allow you to think beyond a certain extent because that's the reality of the commercial world. And that's where I think, you know, there has to be a collaboration within society between practitioners, designers of systems, policymakers, and academics. You know, I think miljul ke kaam masla hal ho sakta hai, you know. It's not a, if we talk about systems thinking, we need to have this kind of a holistic approach, you know. And so to answer your question, today, I don't think technology engineers and designers are thinking about the holistic and societal impacts of technology as much as they should.
In the minutes before we finish, so I will not take long. Dr. Ahmed Hussain is also there. मैं असल में एक पॉइंट और कह रहा था कि वो एक ऐसी किताब है which talks about, वो कहता है will power is not, मतलब will power पे rely करना वो भी डिजाइन आर्किटेक्चर की बात है कि अगर आप अपने आप को रखेंगे, मतलब वही इसीलिए बहुत सारे लोग कहते हैं कि AI को भी लिमिट करना है कुछ केस में, क्योंकि once you are in the game then it's hard to just hear your, तो वो एक पॉइंट मैं करना चाहता, but thank you very much for your remarks. Doctor, I just want to let you know Dr. Ahmed Hussain is also there, and we would like to finish in another 15 minutes.
Right. So, Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Amir. I would like your opinion on these things. You know, so as an academician, as someone who's an expert in AI and who is, you know, encountering these matters of ethics in public policy coming from this discipline. Thank you. Dr. Shahzeb, I would like you to sort of take further the discussion that we were having with Mr. Imran. So do you think it's just a matter of not thinking enough along these lines that doesn't allow the designers to come up with ethically sound designs that helps people grow in more positive ways than in negative ways, or do you think there's something over and above this that sort of disallows this discretion at the level of design, engineering design?
Thank you very much. I think that limitations of, since I have been talking about human agency that is behind the creation of any sort of system, I would say. So I think that it is an extrapolation of the human limitation, which enters into that technology as well. And then those intentions also matter, that why a certain technology was created. So we also have to look at it holistically, and we need to adopt that systems approach. So everything is happening in a certain context. And I think that those limitations, so that's why I think, since it's also an important component of this discussion is Islam, we are trying to look at things from that perspective as well, without going into the debate of what it actually means. I think that the concept of, and somebody mentioned shura'iyat, and that's a great concept. because I think what it does is that it somehow it reduces those limitations of individual minds. So if we engage in a consultative process, but that consultative process cannot happen outside a system. Otherwise, it will become what Mufti Saab called Rai Juzi. So then it is that sort of parochial vision which is connected with profiteering, or which is connected with some other sort of objective, surveillance objective, or any other objective. So for that, we need sound systems within a particular context, within a society, within a country, where you have institutions that sort of safeguard public interest. Otherwise, you cannot always leave it onto the will of a certain engineer, what or how she's going to do it. You need to come up with these holistic, consultative, democratic systems which ensure the creation of human beneficial systems. That is, I think, the most crucial factor that has to be taken into account.
Dr. Asim, from within the US context, where we have lots of such think tanks and lots of such institutions which kind of they claim to be protecting consumer rights. What do they really help, and how far this is actually helping the cause and making really an impact?
I'm going to answer the question. As they were all speaking, my colleagues here, I was thinking about the healthcare system in the United States. So I want to answer the first question you asked through sort of analogy. So it relates to design, and then I want to take your now and other intervention after that. So I think this notion. So I am involved, and I'm teaching actually a methodology that has to do with human-centered design for healthcare. So, healthcare and society is supposed to produce certain things, right? Health. Now, the way that you define health is very variable, right? Some could say it's subjective. There's an objective component, but that objective has a value of it, right? So there's fact value fusion. And so because of in a robust society that has different groups within it, it could mean very different things, right? For some, it could be absence of disease. For some, it could be hedonistic pleasure. I mean, it could be many different things. Yet in society, because policy levels the playing field by those who have been given the authority to make policy, well, these are the sorts of things that healthcare coverage will provide with this conception of health. And if we want to have a different conception of health, then either the private market has to supplement that, or we have to have a democratic deliberation, back to your liberal democracy they're talking about, by which we decide these are the sorts of things that are going to be covered under health, right? Mental, religious, spiritual, whatever else it might be. So I think healthy societies have this, that they recognize that there is a policy dimension that puts constraints, but then allow for a quote unquote free market. What the market will pay for, the market can bear, society and government might not. So that's one comment. But I'm teaching, why I'm saying this is that in reaction to this, and the design methodology, there's in the Obamacare, what's called pejoratively, but in the expansive healthcare coverage in 2008, when President Obama came about, there was this institute started called the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. And the idea was that they spent, and I've been funded by them for the last 3-4 years, was to redesign healthcare such that it's patient-centered and delivers the outcomes that patients think are valuable, and then researches and evaluates whether those sorts of newer systems and ideas are of benefit, and then hopefully then create policies and methodologies by which we can replicate them for the system at large, right? But the idea that there's two simple things that they have as their intervention. One is patient-centered, meaning patients are stakeholders and the users, and they have to be involved in all the design elements. And then you have 8 stakeholder groups that have to be part of the design of that new system or the new project. Payers, healthcare payers, right? Policymakers, patients, patient advocate groups, because sometimes patients themselves are not able to voice the problem. So you say, okay, I have a diabetic association, or I have some other conglomerate or community, by which you create the system and then you test and pilot it. So what I'm trying to say is that there are mechanisms within design that allow you to lift up voices that are marginalized, and then pilot that system and evaluate it and see if it can become a policy implementation by the overall government, right? Because they want to deliver healthcare that's more efficient, cost effective, but also producing health in society. The last thing I'll say is that, because Professor Jane, you asked about design, there's always, if you think about all these popular press movies and things, right? There's always a kill switch. You develop the world's worst nuclear weapon or whatever, and then there's a kill switch, right? And even in an insan, there's a kill switch. Even in an insan, there's this kill switch. Meaning what? So if you take the Maturidi view of kasb, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how we deal with free will, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, nothing we do is not created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says in the Quran that we created you wa a'malikum, in your actions. But the way we get around free will is they say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala controls things. He's qadir kulli shay, right? But he gives us kasb, an ability to petition for actions. And he builds within us the ability to do that or the exact opposite morally. And because of that, so you say, I want to pray. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you the ability to pray, but he gives you the opposite of what prayer would be. He gives you that energy as well. And the way that you choose to do which one thing is how you're going to be judged on the akhirah. So meaning the kill switch, right? So you have the ability to do or to do not the thing. And so in design systems, we have to be able to have those sorts of mechanisms by which we can do, and then we can also kill it when it's problematic and not do it again, right? And so I think that there is a way for us to think about that and that at the outset, but recognize, like my comment to you in the first talk, that we won't fully know until it's there. We won't fully know until it starts doing its thing that we need that kill switch, right? We won't know it, but we have to build it in.
The other thing is that how does the public morality come into contact with this policy making, right? Because we have been talking about morality and ethics of AI. And of course, public policy is generated out of that discourse, right? Again, because you mentioned that we are trying to secure public good, right? Now, what are going to, for instance, when Dr. Asim is talking about health and healthcare, he's saying that, there's a consensus on physical health, but what is beyond that is open to opinions. So faith communities are going to add mental and spiritual health to a complete understanding of health. So likewise, when we are talking about public good, I'm mentioning this because, for instance, all these whistleblowing that keeps on happening, they highlight one thing, and they say that all these technologies, for instance, the like button and so on, they bring out the worst inside human beings, the lowest of the low. Right. So in that sense, how do the two sort of coincide? And then there's this angle of law, but since none of us is a legal expert, so I would like you to just talk about the two, morality and public policy.
All right, thank you. So I think a very interesting perspective shared by the honorable speakers, and I would take on your question and I would try to answer it in two parts. The first part is understanding policy from the angle of three concepts, which is substantive policy, procedural policy, and regulatory policy. Because we are talking about AI, we need to understand. So if we are operating within the domains of how Islam recommends something and then does not recommend that we should not approach that thing. I think as people who follow Islam, we are very clear what should be the substantive policy, which means where we want to go. And when we are adopting technologies in societies which are Islamic, and from that perspective, which are religiously motivated, substantive policies are very clear. They are defined by ordinance of Allah, the creator, and we cannot go beyond that. The second part is procedural policy, right? So public policies are designed very intricately. As I've told earlier, and just at the cost of repetition, as the societies grow complex, they become more and more intricate to solve those challenging problems, which in specifically we call wicked problems, for example, like poverty reduction, like environmental pollution. And to solve them, we need very, very prudent, pragmatic, and deep, motivated by deep thoughts, procedural policies. And then those procedural policies get influenced by audience of Islam as well. So it becomes challenging that your substantive policy is clear, but your procedural policies might become very hazy, and they might get influenced by those things which materially might not be acceptable for the developers of those technologies, for the diffusers of those technologies, for the adopters of those technologies, and then how you want to look at that. And then that concept and then question of morality and ethics kicks in.
I mean, if I could intervene, there's one case study of, let's say, TikTok.
Yeah.
It was banned, and there was a lot of, debate and controversy over that.
Yeah.
What are the takeaways from there? Although it's just one isolated example, and there's a need to contextualize it, but still, if you just take it like that, to see, what's just the moral sentiments, and then everything that sort of surrounded the controversy.
Yeah. So I think I'm not very totally clear about what the controversy was, but understanding it as a broader perspective, I would say that, you see, TikTok, why was it conceived? Why is it being used? What is the objective? What is the goal? And how are people using it? So it can have so many different dimensions and so many different interpretations, which makes it all the more confusing. And then when people start using it for their own benefit and their own vested interest, just as we have been talking about capitalistic societies, how they are profit oriented, how they go into those domains where if they are religiously motivated, they would not go, because profit is not the only motive for the society. So I think personally, these procedural policies, they need to be thought through very deeply in societies like us. And then the concept of regulatory policy that comes in, because regulation, we have been talking about AI regulation. For example, if someone wants to live longer through use of AI, excuse me, how would you interpret it in an Islamic society? Because our strong belief is that the period of our life has been preordained. And there was a controversy on ventilators during COVID, that whether ventilators should be used to keep people alive or not. Similarly, if algorithms predict your aging and try to give you some idea of how you are going to develop a particular disease, and it might increase your life, how would you use it? Then that regulation comes in. Similarly, I read somewhere there was a talk about driverless cars, autonomous cars, that if it has to choose between killing the driver or the road, the pedestrian or anyone, how should it choose? Then the counter debate was that if a boat is sinking and there are 100 people in that boat, and if you have to drown 2 people or 3 people to save 97 people, would you let those two people drown or not? Or you're going to save 97 people? What is right or wrong? So regulation needs to be very it's again very complex. So I think it's
how do you actually practically take the decision? Is it consequence based?
Absolutely. So in policy, there are trade-offs, just in economics, right? Opportunity cost has to be there. So when you are making trade-offs, you need to understand what are you going to forego. And if your ultimate objective is served through better outcomes, which is measured in terms of effectiveness of a policy, you would choose it. So if you are drawing a decision criteria matrix and you put efficiency and effectiveness as 2 parameters of understanding how policy should roll out in practical field, I think prudent and pragmatic and wise policymakers would go for effectiveness more. It's not that efficiency has to be sacrificed, but when choosing between the 2, you would go for effectiveness. And that has to be understood from the perspective of what's substantive, what procedural, and what regulatory policy framework you want to install for a particular technology, for the particular, if there are discussions and debates around morality and ethical issues, and how you want to deploy them and install them. Yeah.
But while doing that, is there a dialogue with the intangibles as well? What about the intangibles? Because we have talked about the over hyper quantification of things.
Yeah.
So how can you strike a balance?
Yes. So I think in a particular policy domain, there are always ideas, institutions, and actors. So ideas flow around. So we call it garbage can model, right? So ideas are like, in a policy stream, there are discussions about, in the politics stream, there is discussion about a problem, whether it is AI, whether it is health issues, whether it is education. Then in policy streams, experts discuss solutions to those problems. And then there is a policy window which opens, and then you couple the streams through that, and you devise and you set the agenda and you formulate policies. So intangibles, they always come in the shape of maybe ideas which are flowing around in that soup bowl, which are flowing around in that garbage can. And then in that garbage can, you try to understand how those ideas as intangibles fit into that puzzle. And you try to strike a balance between how ideas or intangible things and how tangible things, they have to be meshed together to make robust policies which can remain resilient and which can remain, because you see, the major challenge for policymakers for any policy domain is sustainability of that policy. So usually what happens is that when political changeover takes place, the policies fall apart. And the continuity and sustainability of policies, that is a big question, which is being studied extensively, but there is no right or wrong answer. And there is actually no clear-cut answer that has to be taken into account.
What about having this using this tool of tarbiyah, or the character making of individuals, which can stand up to all such changes at the government level?
Yeah, I think very important. Tarbiyah, education. What is the difference between literacy and education? I don't know. Most of you might agree or disagree. I'm not sure. But literacy brings you a piece of paper which shows your skill set. But education revolutionizes you. It gives you that that bigger skill, that macro skill, which lets you think critically, analytically, and then feel why you are human, why you should interact in a particular manner, and what should be brought out of some kind of interaction. So tarbiyah is extremely important. And as Muslims, I think tarbiyah starts from our home, from the lap of our mothers, and from the interaction with our siblings, from the interaction with our parents, and then with the interaction of our inspirers and teachers. And it has to be brought in. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to ask Dr. Shahzeb, I think this should be the last and final question. Dr. Athar talked about the fact that there are substantive policies and then there are procedural policies. Now, tying this up with what Dr. Suri told us and his talk on the procedural good, do you really think that there is like the two are aligned in our context, especially, or because I feel like that the substantive good, perhaps because as Dr. Asim said, that we have that sort of the Muslim moral intuition. But when it comes to procedures, we are sort of following the herd, because our policymakers go to all these places to learn policy matters, and then they come here and they mimic that. So what do you say regarding that?
Well, as they say, history matters. So if we talk about the structure of our society and the institutions which exist here, we see a continuity from the colonial period. And that, I think, has persisted. So apparently we have people who are Pakistanis, people who are Muslims, but look at the way our economic system works. Now, how can we justify it in the light of Islamic principles? Look at the way our politics works. And we can't even call it a democracy. Yet the debate is non-existent. Everybody calls it a democracy when it is not a democracy. It is something else. Money is what matters. So if you are a millionaire or a billionaire, only then you can enter into politics. Otherwise, and genuine consultative process is not there. So just shift it for a while and think about all the professions that exist. So for instance, that is where we spend most of our times. But look at, let's say, how many farmers are there in our parliament? None. How many laborers are there in our parliament? How many teachers are there in our parliament? How many homemakers or housewives are there in the parliament? So if you begin to look at these professions and see what sort of contribution they have in our, of course, our macro policy context, so it's none. For instance, I'll give you an example. A colleague of mine who's also a friend, he is General Secretary of the Academic Staff Association of our university. He, and earlier than that, a president of Federation of All Pakistan University Academic Staff Associations. Both of them say in unison that HEC has never consulted us. In fact, the president, Dr. Mehboob Hussain, who chairs the history department at Punjab University, he said that he wrote a letter to the HEC chairman asking him that you have never consulted us. We are the largest body of teachers in the country, representing university teachers all over Pakistan, and we have never been invited to any consultative process. So where do those policies come from? And again, people would tell us, people who have been at senior positions at HEC, they would say, well, we have to follow the donors and what they have to say. So there is this complete absence. Just, I think a month ago, there was a conference of 180 vice chancellors of Pakistani universities at PC Bourbon. Again, it was funded by British Council. So the point is that these agents, I would say, in the sense that they have certain objectives. I would say again that they would. So I think that we need to look at it in this context. So when we look at those policies, very easily we can deconstruct that substantive policy, what is going on. And then procedural, of course, that's a different matter altogether. So I think that we need to take this into account and do something about it. The point is to change it, I would say.
Just one final remark from what has sort of transpired from this discussion is that, of course, we need to talk about policy matters pertaining to technology and AI. But prior to that, there are broader, larger issues that somehow need to be more settled, and before we can embark upon something more specific like AI, despite the magnanimity of it, still, because things that have existed for decades, prior to AI, we are still grappling with policy issues for that. For instance, healthcare, right? So again, that just shows the sort of the impoverished nature of the policy making. So inshallah, we'll carry on with the discussions tomorrow, with the talks and some of the panel discussions. Thank you, everyone. Jazakallah khair.